Today is August 4th, 2021. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki Naganago Meko Che Stokomaki. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. Native Calgarian is being recorded on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet. North of the border, the Siksika, Gunai, and Bagani of the Confederacy. These lands were signed on September 22nd, 1877, Oxford Treaty 7, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley, Chiniki, Bearspaw Nations of the Stoney, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status, and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot, Nolkinstis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene, or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. My father is so Canadian. I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution, while having an Indian Act imposed status card. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Hare people, also called the Great Bear Lake people in Treaty 11. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe, meaning many horse town, named after the Calgary Stampede. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and acknowledging our role as treaty partners. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or misinterpretations will be on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share what I know as I walk down the Red Road. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to my previous donors for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. Also, giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening on. I have a YouTube channel where you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And it was actually through my social media and emails that I got in touch with Caleb. And I'm really grateful to have you here. And I'd love to give you some time to introduce yourself.
Danse, Nasigas, Nimatoasa ni Nasigas on Caleb Anacker. Treaty 6 territory, Otania, Oma Pataro Otania. Hello, my name is Caleb. I was blessed or gifted with a ceremonial name by Ken Saddleback in a chicken dance at Blue Quills a few years ago of Dancing Rock. However, I'm a white settler and I'm a guest here on Treaty 6 territory. We're currently sitting in some of the territory nearest to Saddle Lake and positioned between Saddle Lake and Kihuen Cree Nation. We're also surrounded by several Métis settlements: Kikano Métis settlement, Elizabeth Métis settlement, Fishing Lake Métis settlement. And so we are on traditional lands of the Cree, the Métis, the Dene, the Stoney Nakoda. Lots of First Peoples have crossed these lands over the years. And I choose to introduce myself in Nehiawewen as to speak to the language that came to the land and to the spirits that come from this place, and to recognize that I am a visitor here and that I have responsibilities to treaty and to the people and to all of the beings that are here. My people are French and come from Normandy, and are German and come from Leipzig, and are English and come from Wales. And I don't know much of that lineage because I guess whiteness becomes the voice of all of that. And so there's much more about me that I wish I knew and I could know more of, but my lineage is whitewashed, literally, in being Canadian and being American. Some of my family are from. Thank you so much, Michelle, for having us on the show. I listen to it regularly, and so I feel honored to be a guest here. And after I introduce myself, my hope is to more or less listen to you and Roy have a conversation. And I'll let Roy introduce himself, but I see him as my mentor and my role model, and one of the many guides that assisted and led this project about restoring the history of St. Paul de Métis, which is a town just south of ours, which is now called St. Paul, but properly and originally belonged, which is not really a good word, but belonged to the Métis people. So
Awesome.
Thank you. Hi.
No, thank you, Caleb. That was wonderful. Roy, I am so honored to have you here. I can't wait to talk to you.
Okay, I guess it's my turn.
Yeah.
And I have to start off by saying I can't come close to the introduction you guys give, but I'll keep it simple because part of my program that I'm in is keeping everything simple. My name is Roy Missal. I'm part of the Garno clan, which originated from the Red River area of close to Winnipeg. From what I know is my great grandfather was quite I have a hard time saying that, entrepreneur but anyway, he was a pretty wealthy businessman. He owned he established large tracts of hayland around Hay Lakes, Alberta. He came to Edmonton area and he had tracts of land along the river that he formed with the idea of getting the rights to it, which he never did. He was also in politics, and he was actually, I think part of his demise is when they found out or accused him of being part of the Louis Riel regime, which affected his wealth and his being in politics. And from what I heard, I read in history and heard other people within the family talk. One of the things that really, when we started writing this book, or I guess throughout my life, was not feeling complete. Hearing these stories about, the wealth of my ancestors. Yet, if I brought that out in school, people would say, "Well, if you had wealth, where is it now?" And if I talked to my mother about it, she'd never really answered to that. It was just, kept quiet. So for myself, I really believe that the Métis were to be seen and not heard. But going back to my ancestry, my great grandfather was of Ojibwe descent from North Dakota, and he I guess he had quite a bit of doings back there. If I haven't read the complete history on it, but and on my dad's side, my father's side, he's of German descent, born in Volynska, Ukraine, of German descent. But I think my father could have passed for a Métis. He's very dark, like a dark German or whatever.
Sure.
And we also farmed land in Saddle Lake, so I got to know the native people, pretty good. And I guess I could call it being blessed of growing up with natives. I never seen anything, bad or whatever. Like in school, we're taught to. I think even as Métis, we're taught to look down a little bit at the natives, and to me that was all taught stuff. And but anyway, going back to this incompleteness. I grew up with this feeling of not being a part of in a lot of areas of my life, and I think it did have a bearing on my addiction. I at a very young age, alcohol took all those feelings away, and I could use that. And anytime something affected me, I guess I ground it away with alcohol. And then somewhere down the line, I crossed that line of no return. And I think there's so many addictions out there. It doesn't have to be alcohol. It's when you don't feel complete, you turn to something else, and and I think as a suppressed people, we it's also it's control of them. Like you keep somebody suppressed and not feeling worthy, they have a hard time becoming the person they can be.
Right?
But you know, having shared in this book has made me feel proud and made me feel more complete of who I am, and knowing that there's nothing wrong in being Métis. And you know, as a matter of fact, this last couple of days, I shared with a lady in St. Paul yesterday. She grew up really embracing the French culture, not so much in the native, but I know her father worked for my dad on the farm, and she started sharing, and she just started opening up all the sides that you know, she said my mom used to do this, do that, and we never talked about it, like, you know, the native part, like the camping, the hunting, I think even some leather work and that. But you know, I shared that with her, and I says, did you ever feel you could share that, you know, with your French culture? And she goes, no. And I think that's a very important thing that I see around our town, is especially in St. Paul, if you embrace the French culture, and then just slowly your bloodline could be clean again. You know, you could become clean again. Well, I couldn't understand, why were you dirty in the first place, you know?
Thank you.
You know? And I could never understand that. And if I ever tried to share that with somebody, whatever they were taught would come out. You know, it would be you guys, or I'd always hear this thing about get over it. And that really bothered me, that saying get over it.
Yeah.
You know, I was sharing, and the analogy I use is if a child comes home and he's getting beat up at school, and his dad doesn't know how to deal with it, and he says, you know, he asks his dad, you know, Dad, what can I do? I'm getting beat up at school. And the dad said, just get over it. Why? Because the father doesn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that in life. A lot of people don't know. So it's a very easy way to justify, you know, whatever you're saying, just get over it. In other words, you don't want to deal with it. And I think it's fear-based, because there's a lot of people that, you know, I always say the person with the big club, maybe deep down they know there's some things that weren't right, but it's just easier to say get over it, and then it'll go away. But it doesn't go away. You have to get through it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what this book's about. We wrote, it's about getting through stuff, because everybody has a story.
Yes.
You know, yeah, everybody has a story about their life, and when we can come to a table and come to a circle and share our stories, we can come out with an understanding of one another. We might not have a complete agreement with one another, but we'll have a good understanding, and then through that, people can become a we, like you said, not a me, a we.
Yeah.
That's where the French part comes in. But I have a little bit of humor. I haven't said my Kentucky Fried Chicken joke yet.
It's coming. I love KFC.
Well, that's part of, in the book we wrote, there was supposed to be my what you could claim to fame is supposed to be KFC under my name. But that's just a little joke we have on the side. Everybody's got a degree. Mm-hmm. Mine was going to be KFC. So.
You got your doctorate for sure in KFC. Yeah.
I don't know if KFC would go with that though.
You know,
you got to have the rights to everything now.
You got to know those secrets, those 12 secret ingredients.
That's it. That's right. And but you know, just overall what I said, like, and I think people over the years, people got these little pockets of each has their own story, and we're shooting arrows and fire at each other, and it doesn't. I mean, everybody's got things that happen in their life, and I think over the years, people. I was just watching a show last night where people, when they first came to this country, they survived with one another. They had to rely on one another. Then as colonization took power, it became individualism.
Mm.
You know, if somebody sees that, oh, well, I got to do better than the next guy. Instead of keeping that community spirit, there was a separation, and then there's pocket separations, culture separation, and then everybody's got their own idea of what's right and what's wrong. And in reality, we're all equally one, but somehow we've separated all that. And our minister in church said explained it the best to me. He says the Métis were like the Israelites. They were wandering for years out in the desert, and the natives got a reserve at least, but the Métis people were the roadside people. They ended up kind of with nothing, like left on. And I think I didn't experience that too much in as a Métis because of the name Garno. We were accepted more into as and it's all about that status thing. It has a lot to do with it. And so I wasn't I guess looked down at as much as some other people. And it's a shame we live in a world where somebody can do good, you can be happy for him, but that doesn't make you better than the next person. It shouldn't.
Yeah.
But for some people, that's what it's about. It's I'm better than you because I have this. No, but what do you have inside? It's what you have inside that counts, not not on the outside. So that's the way I view it. So but I'm very grateful that the Métis, and I really believe the God of my understanding is sovereign, and the truth will always come out. Like the way I best explain in the book, there's a fellow that's part of our book. He's from Quebec, and he said, "Roy, what happened to my Métis people?" I said, "They're all in hiding." And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, if you just embrace the French culture and you pretend you're French, you'd be walking around with a feather sticking out of your head or whatever. But if you're called a Frenchman, you're a Frenchman, eh? And if you embrace that part, then you're able to fit into society better." I think you talked about that, your dad protecting you, protecting you from that outside things of the world. And but like I said the best way I can explain what happened to St. Paul is my mother used to say, "Roy, clean up your room." And I used to sweep everything under the rug. And then 4 or 5 months later, my mom said, "What are the lumps under the rug?" And I said, "Well, that's what's happening in history. People are asking, what are the lumps under the rug?" And a lot of people that I've talked to, I'm in the moving business. It wasn't people from St. Paul itself. It was people from outside asking me the questions. What happened to this town? And that probably 10, 15 years ago, people started asking that lady from Nova Scotia, but she knew the history of what happened there. I guess there was a bounty on natives there even at one time.
Mm-hmm. Cornwallis.
Yeah. So I go, holy man, and so she's a historian, or she likes reading up on history, but she knew more about St. Paul de Métis than I did, for the simple fact that she really got into that. Yeah. And she said, why isn't your town still called St. Paul de Métis? And I started thinking, why isn't it called that? There's got to be reasons behind it. So I think a lot of the stuff that happened to St. Paul itself, and well, not right from Red River, right from the start of the colonies, was the motives behind the church and the government. Yeah. I think there was underlying motives right from the start. Now, that's my opinion. If you talk to, I think, a Catholic historian, you're going to get the opposite for sure. and I mean, but that's what they were taught. They were taught to defend their written history. But I think through the book, by sharing with 10 Métis, and nine out of the 10 have the same story. Yeah, there'll be some truth to it. Yeah, and that's what made me more confident of what I heard through the years. It was probably truthful. It wasn't just hearsay. And I think that's part of the gift from the Creator is with the Métis and the natives is this verbal. It's not written history, it's verbal, passed down from generation to generation, and I remember on my family side, they never talked too much, but if they had a few drinks, they talked about what they really felt about the church and that, because I think their true feelings came out, eh? Yeah. And that's the way it is. When you suppress something, you pretend it's not there, but it's still there. And I think for any individual, whatever trauma you went through young in life, there's a root inside there, and the root has to come out where it's all started. If it doesn't, it's still in there. You can pretend you got over it, but you know, and even to where I am today, there's probably still stuff inside of me that I don't understand or know. But if it's God's will, that'll be revealed. But as the more I become a part of this, the more I get to know who I really am. And
I feel that.
And feel proud of it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't have to try to be somebody I'm not, you know, and it doesn't really matter. Even the person that maybe lashes out against me, he was taught that. He was taught that. So I got to look at that person that, hey, that's where they were taught. All I can do is love that person for who they are. And maybe one day they'll come to an understanding. Yeah. You know, and I know when we presented this book to the museum, St. Paul Museum, the French Cultural Museum, there was a lot of very defensive people. But what God kind of showed me was, you know what, this person was like what she learned, she thought was the truth. Doesn't mean it was. And then to have this come out was probably very traumatic for her. But by just being good to her and saying, you know, there's another side to look at this, I think that person can slowly come to a different understanding. But when, you know, it's like anything. If you think something, you know, it's like when I grew up in school, I thought every communist or Protestant was a bad person because I was taught that.
Yeah.
Then I found out, no, I was told to think that. Doesn't mean it's right. I went to Cuba. I had no problem coming from, well, I did have trouble coming from Cuba. I started saying I came from Cuba. I was on the plane going to the States. A lot of people didn't like what especially with my Cuban shirt on.
I bet. Oh, that's great. Yeah, you know what? I really appreciate you coming on. I don't think I've told people that we are lucky enough to have both Caleb and Roy, and they're both co-authors of this book, Restoring the History of St. Paul des Métis. And that's actually going to be our next book club selection. But the bigger picture, it was because Caleb actually reached out to me to even tell me this book existed. And I'm really grateful for that because, you know, everything Roy is saying about us, you know, not really knowing our history and not knowing and to me, every single place in Canada needs to have a conversation about what Métis contributions were to their town settlement, the city in a lot of cases as well, because it is the Métis that were, you know, racially targeted, displaced people, given so much discrimination because of Louis Riel and the you know, the rightful rebellion. Frankly, like he was really trying to fight for rights for the Métis and you know, inherent rights that we would talk about today when it comes to the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People. And this is a problem all across Canada that no one wants to talk about. So when you said defensiveness, this is the fear that we're getting from settlers. You know, when we signed those treaties, it was with the assumption of equality, and we've never had that. And I think they're so afraid of losing any type of power, which is the really unfortunate part. Like you were saying that you were taught, you know, that Protestants and communists were evil. It's an interesting thing because I've been, since my daughter has been homeschooled, it's been really apparent to me that our schooling system teaches white supremacy. And so if you're a person who's not white, you are kind of being taught to, you know, hate yourself. And if you are and you know, non-Indigenous person, you get to look down upon Indigenous people because that's what they teach in the school system, inadvertently, with ignorance. And you know, a lot of so-called progressives will say, oh, well, you know, we know they've got a really bad situation, but they still have kind of a white savior lens that still demeans who we are as a people. When the irony is we are so strong, we are survivors, and we have this incredible history that's being suppressed, which is the brilliance of this book. is to try to talk about the actual history of St. Paul. And because so many of our elders are still alive to talk about it, like how lucky are we to even have you here, Roy, to discuss this? So I hope you understand the gravity of this. You are giving, Albertan kids a history lesson that they never had before. You, along with Caleb, Tanya, Megan. So some of these folks here that are listed as your co-authors, what was it like working with them, talking about all of these things?
You're talking to me?
Yeah, Roy, you bet.
Well, I think what it done for me was because we all come from a different background, and we became like, we all started off individually, but we all had an understanding of one another. And I think what blew me away is when we got Nanji, can't remember his last name, but he's a South African. And I go, well, what is he? But I mean, there was so much colonization, everything that happened in South Africa, and he brought so much to the table too, like but at first I'm going, well, what has he got to do with St. Paul the Métis? But that's an understanding I had then. But by being open-minded, I go, hey, everybody's and it doesn't really matter. I think I'm taught, I grew up, my dad was a farmer. Well, this is the way you got to farm. No, I think you can be open to anything. If you're open-minded, and it doesn't mean you have to agree with something or whatever, but it's the ability to be open-minded and let everybody have their story, and I think that's so important, because I think a lot of people got stuff, even like the settlers that came to St. Paul, they were misled. They were just thought this land was open to them. And going back to what you said about us being resilient and overcoming stuff, I know the Métis people in St. Paul, they were only granted 80 acres, I think, at the beginning. And they survived on 80, whereas the white settler was allowed 160. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there you go. I remember we made a float for the parade here about 10 years ago. We only got it half done. We came in second place. So I go, hey, there you go. Only done it. We came in second. So, I mean, and I'm, when I start thinking of the history of the Métis coming here, in the wilderness, like I do a lot of traveling on motorbike and that, and I figure I'm really out in the wilderness. Like I just done a trip to the Yukon and everything, and me and a couple buddies, and we took a couple logging roads, and I figured, oh geez, I'm really remote. And then I started thinking, what did the two Courrier de Bois go through? They're in the middle of nowhere, and they're the ones that formed this land, and never mind the little towns before that. Like, it's just amazing what they encountered. And like, I've been up in Lac La Range and where the waterways were, they had the portages, these boats 15, 20 kilometers, these big York boats and that. And no wonder the white settler came and were kind of pissed off at the Métis, because they were they had to go through harsh conditions, and if it wasn't for the natives, they would have never survived. And I think a lot of people don't understand, going a little off topic of the Métis, that the natives, I heard, were the treaty signed, they were the keepers of the land. They said, they didn't say they owned the land. So there's a lot of misinterpretation, young people going around, we own the land. No, they don't own the land, but that's what it takes. People hone in on small stuff like that, and then it becomes a reality. It's not. It's misled information. But having said that, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's a white person, a Métis, or whatever. You still got those small core group that hit the media, and people don't see the information for what it really is. Like the old saying goes, there's always two sides to every story. And I do a lot of coffee drinking, and I don't believe I believe some coffee shop talk, but none of it is. I just listen, because I explained to one person one time, I said, don't believe everything you hear. I said, I broke my toe in the east end of town. By the time we got to the west end of town, I was in a full body cast and I was drinking out of a straw. So, I mean, it all starts with something small, and sometimes, so I think, what I'd like to get back to is this. I really believe these circle meetings, the more we have them, the more people come to an understanding. We didn't get to where we are in this unsettled world overnight. And I think somebody said it's going to take a real long time to get back to where we should be. And I said, I don't think so, because we live in a fast-paced world now. So what took a long time to unravel, I think can be brought back a lot faster with the media we have now, with the understanding of the younger generation, because the younger generation, I think, really wants to know what really happened in history. You know, and I think it's time the rug is lifted and the lumps are there. And I explained it the way, this is my understanding, is when Mr. Lamoureux asked me, you know, what do you think has to happen? I said, well, you're a man of faith. You confess your inequities to your church once a week or whatever. I said, I think it's time your church goes to confession.
Yes.
You know, and that's just my understanding, because church is made by man. And for every person, I believe our creator and God's word is pure. Man gets a hold, forms a religion, there's an evil thread running through it. You don't watch, if the thread gets too thick, so does the evil. So I mean, and then that's accountability. And then there's nothing wrong with being accountable. The truth will set you free. So I mean, and it doesn't matter who you are or what you are. And I think carrying the big club, there's nothing wrong with carrying.
You just froze up. There's
upholding the banner, and not using it to knock people down. Because, you know, even myself in school, and I'm not going back to feel sorry for myself or anything, but I remember going to school feeling proud, well, you know, feeling good. And then we talked about Louis Riel. And when you said something about Louis Riel being called, well, a crazy man or something, well, he was emotionally involved with his people. So I don't know who the psychiatrist that deemed him crazy. He might have been a Roman Catholic or whatever, you know, whatever part of the other side or whatever, you know, the side that deemed him wrong. But it doesn't mean he was probably very emotional, and I think he was a visionary. I think he was so pronounced seeing what was happening to his people that he might have been viewed as a crazy man or something.
Wow, I think
because he was so determined for the rights of his people that probably people said, well, you are crazy to do that, but hey, he really believed in what was true.
We come from a society that doesn't get so defensive about Canada being for human rights, but yet they did it at the expense of all of our human rights and perpetuated genocide on us. So for somebody to demonize Louis Riel, that's their own insecurities. You talked about fear again. You know, there's a lot of importance in this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. All of these pages are scary to settlers to deal with their actual truth of how they got here. And, you know, and it's important, like, no wonder you were taught to hate Protestants when, you know, this is what they teach. They taught that. And it's so well documented now in the entire Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. And I'm grateful. I'm so grateful to you and all the other elders that told and speak your truth, because we need to hear it as youth. Like, you're right, we want to learn. And for me, I would rather, I've spent my last 14 years unlearning, as opposed to, really, I had a lot of white supremacy ingrained in me. And I've had to really unlearn a lot of that. And then, of course, I find my pride when I realize what my family had survived in order for me to be here right now. So everything that you're saying is really scary to settlers, because they don't know these truths. And my hope is that we will start teaching real curriculum. And, you know, you made a point about, who owns the land. And the truth is that I've always been told by our elders that, you know, we inherit the land, but we have to give it to our next generations. We're just borrowing it for the next generations. And when I say we, collectively, is like this Western economy that's been imposed on our lands. It's really hurt the earth. It's really hurt our water system, everything. There's nothing unaffected. So I can totally see why somebody who's been affected by Western colonization would be instrumental in this conversation. And you're talking about the circles and sharing, they are the key. I've been lucky enough to run this book club for 5 years now, and it's probably going to continue now on Zoom forever until I'd have nobody else to have a book club with, I guess. But to me, that it is important to have Indigenous-led conversations in these circles because we've never had them before. And your voice and the voice of our elders, that needs to be front and center so that we hear from you your version of history and what you've lived through, what you experienced, because this is what we need to know in order to move forward. I'm not ashamed of our past. It happened. We just have to learn about it and not ever do anything like that again, and start dismantling the systems that today. I'm also a co-chair to the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Committee in Calgary. And we experience so much violence, and denying our truth is the fundamental root of it. We can't quit. We have to quit doing this. We have to be honest. And part of the reason why I started this podcast is so that we can get proper media and representation and have voices like yours telling this truth. I'm grateful for it. So, in this book, you talk about the circles actually, and that's a part of how it came to be. And I was just wondering, are you still continuing the circles, and are there other folks that are interested, and how are those continuing?
Caleb answered that one.
COVID put a damper on us doing things, and we did a sort of a book review or a book club in 6 sessions. We broke the book up into segments, and we, over the COVID period in the winter, invited anybody who was part of Reconciliation St. Paul, which is sort of we call it a grassroots non-organization.
Yeah.
We refuse to have leaders. We refuse to have a central body. We refuse to conform to all of the things that mainstream society says that you have to be a society, to be an organization, to be an agency. We just don't do any of those things. We're neighbors who get together and we share what we have without status, without recognition by a government. We just bring whatever we have to the table, and we meet and we try to get things done by getting to know each other better, by sharing food. Sorry, I was one of the little direction there with Reconciliation St. Paul, but it's important to know is that we're just neighbors getting together, learning to know, love each other, and to share with each other. That's important to know, that that's how we conduct ourselves in circle. And so we have these circles, and we have people contributing to and learning about the history of St. Paul de Métis on Zoom. And we had people from Ontario who originated from the area, and a young man from BC who reached out and said that it changed the course of his life in 6 little sessions. And that's
the power of what we
made
do.
It all worth it.
That's the power, and that's why it's so important, because it's not just settlers that are learning about their history, but Jesus, for some of us, that's really empowering. You're just floating for all this time wondering, why does everybody hate me? Why will no one take me seriously? Why am I dismissed regularly? Why am I mistreated all the time? And when you hear the reason why, and it essentially does come from land theft, is because while we agree that no one's supposed to own the land, that's not what the Western economy has imposed on us at all.
Yeah.
And they see it as that, and they are really proud to have 6 generations paying a mortgage on land that was stolen. So that's what's threatening them. That's where their fear is coming from. And the irony is that we're not even asking for all that land back. I heard a statistic, it's like 80% of the land is Crown land. We can all utilize that land. It doesn't have to be just leased out to mining companies and oil and gas production. It can actually be given to the people as well. and we
Mhm.
could actually live equally. But that's a lot of conversation for folks that are still brand new to learning their true history. So, I'm really grateful you're doing all of this work. And just as you got inspired by just that one person who said this changed the directory of their life, that makes me so happy to see somebody, reclaiming who they are or reclaiming their understanding of what they thought they knew. And even for me, today is going to be one of those days for me because I grew up. So I grew up in Sylvan Lake, and I graduated high school there in 1994. So I was living through the Oka crisis, what they actually call the Ganawage invasion, which is a proper way to say it, because there was no crisis. They got invaded, and they were targeted by the military and by the town of Oka. It's an awful story. Anyway, that movie Beans has come out, and it's told through the lens of a young girl. And my daughter is 14, so we're gonna go see it. But I remember what it was like being that age in a school system that is white supremacist and really derogatory towards Indigenous people, and people looking at me like it was somehow my fault and looking down on me like it was somehow my problem. And that's that bigger concept of just anti-Indigenous bias that's so prevalent in our society and in our media. And if we as Indigenous people don't make our media and tell our truth, like there's no way these settler editors and internet providers will do it. I mean, our stuff gets regularly reported on Facebook, Twitter. Our posts get taken down on Instagram, TikTok, everything. So it's just really important that we try to find some way to tell these truths for not just our youth and our future, but like I find the settler youth are so open to hearing these truths. Like they're not scared of the fear-based belief system that, oh, well, these natives are going to steal the land. It's not like that. But you have to uneducate all of that anti-Indigenous bias that has been taught over the decades to all these folks, right?
Yeah.
So generations of anti-Indigenous bias that we have to undo.
That's the other work that other members of our team are also doing, is that we've done a couple of presentations, one to the Museum Society that Roy talked about, another to the French Association. Pierre gave a French language presentation, and it, although our intention is love and sharing, the protection of white fragility has created an effect where we are, whether we want to or not, kicking a hornet's nest.
Yes. Yep.
And so that's been a struggle for us to work through, is how do we love someone who's lashing out at us?
Yeah.
And that's been something that we're working on. And that's exactly right, is the younger people, the next generation, they're ready for it. It's the old guard that are still holding on to their stories. And so that, we've done a couple of these presentations, and there's all of the tropes that you would expect would come out, is that you guys are revising history. And look, we have French historians that we're going to bring in to tell you that oral history is not good history. It's just rumor and storytelling. It can't be relied on. And so like, that's the kind of resistance that we're getting, which is too bad, because we're not trying to take the French side of the story away. We're trying to bring forward the Métis account that has been suppressed and has been kept down, and has created a dynamic in St. Paul where there are folks who are from the Métis communities who get stomach tension just coming into town. Have that ugly gut feeling, is the words that they use, just coming into town.
Yeah.
And so when you have that dynamic where you've got someone who's on edge and has an ugly gut feeling just coming around to do their business in town, and then sees that they're being followed everywhere that they go in town. I'm tired. I'm really, really tired of hearing every single Indigenous person that comes to deal in St. Paul or any town in Alberta. It always comes up. I get watched. I get assumptions made about me. Why does that have to be the case?
I know.
And so like, and so those two things, they feed into each other. You've got this ugly gut feeling about that you're being watched and that you're being treated lesser than. And so you're on edge. And so when someone does finally cross the line with you and you express your anger and frustration with them, then you become the stereotype that the mainstream society wants of you, that you're uncontrolled, that you're savage, that you're a problem, you're lesser than. And like, that's a positive cycle that the only way that you can break that down is for people to get together with safety for everyone to be able to express their stories. And I mean, call it what you want, circle process is the protocol, is the methodology for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the big things that I hear from the settler point of view, you know, on the French part of St. Paul de Métis, was the fact that the church was so powerful. And I hear from a lot of French families how the first son and the first daughter was told they should become a priest or a nun. And you know, and then there was a church every 10 miles. And I can understand the progression back then. Like there was a lot of settlers coming in and everything. So in order to be to fulfill the wants of the church every 10 miles, well, you're told, well, if your son becomes a priest and your daughter you'll be blessed. Well, you know, I mean, you're blessed, you're closer to God or whatever. Does that mean that person wanted to become that? No. I think everybody has a destiny in life, a purpose. And it doesn't matter who you are, if you're bullied in school and you become a policeman, you can use that power in the wrong way. If you're forced to become a priest or a nun and that's not your calling, you use that power in the wrong way. Now, is that person bad or is the system wrong? Mm-hmm. I look at the system as being wrong, you know, and the system is the one that has to answer to that. The person that was so-called done wrong could go to confession and say, you know, Lord, I never wanted to be a priest and become a married man. And to me, God looks down at him and says, okay, go on with your life. But one day the system will have to answer to that. And that's what's happening. And it doesn't matter whether it be a church, a business, or whatever. If your motives are wrong, you have to be accountable for your actions sooner or later.
Yeah.
And as an individual, like myself, as an alcoholic, I never drank every day, but when I couldn't face life on life's terms, I use alcohol. Now, it's not my wife's fault. It's not the doctor's fault. It's not. I have to become honest with myself. And that's what has to happen in society. People have to be honest. And that's why if we can come together collectively, all what became wrong can become right again.
Yeah,
to a big degree.
Yes.
Because there's just so much negativity and wrongdoings in the world that that's why there's so much tension. There's so much, stress in the world. So what is man doing? He's creating all kinds of stuff to get rid of the stress. But for myself, actually, it's about being honest and about coming to these tables. And that's the medicine I need.
Yes.
Now that's my own individual look on things. But, and we live in a world where we live in an instant world. People want instant happiness, instant this. No, it ain't going to happen if we don't get down to, like I say, to the core of that root where it started from. So this going back to, people say don't go back to the past. Sometimes you have to go, even as an individual, you have to go back to your childhood, to your inner child. Well, that's what I think people have to do worldly. You have to go back to that inner beginning of where this all started wrong.
Well, Roy, I think the next generation, like we're trying to do that intergenerational healing so that our, next generation doesn't have to. And I think that's the power of what you're talking about, is that by trying to be accountable to yourself as well, that's what that intergenerational healing is. And culture is prevention. So the sooner we learn our truths and our culture, these are things that will help us move forward. And I was lucky enough to be a part of something called Wellbriety. And there's a wonderful program called Mending Broken Hearts, and it really deals with the trauma that causes the addictions. And to me, that's, well, and not just that, it's actually for grief. So I find that in our world, especially because we have so many, injustices, that it's almost impossible to grieve, right? Unless you're given a safe space to actually discuss it and not being told, oh, there's no way a police officer would have done that. There's no way that the Canadian justice system would have done that. And our people are grieving, they're hurting, and we need to give them that space to grieve properly and to tell their truth so that they can move forward. So, it is all part of the bigger picture, and we have to be honest about the past in order to move forward. So I'm grateful that you're doing this work, and I'm grateful Caleb is. I'm grateful for your reconciliation circle. Here, our book club really evolved into the group that started doing the renaming of Langevin, and I think John A. McDonald will be our next school that we try to go after. We're in the middle of an election cycle, though, so I think that we're going to really have to hold our school trustee candidates to account on some of those things, but also our municipal and leaders that are running for councils and for mayors, they have to all be asked about what truth and reconciliation looks like to them, because a lot of them come in with their, anti-Indigenous bias. And really, Call to Action 57 is all public servants having Indigenous education and anti-racism training. And the average politician running, holy, do they need that? Holy. So has there been much of a response from St. Paul municipality, like the councillors, the mayors? Are they a part of your group at all?
Well, I just want to elaborate on one thing. We had
Sure.
Interview with the county of St. Paul.
Ooh.
And which turned out really good. But the only thing, the last statement was by one of the French settlers, says, when are you going to write this book in French? And then I go, there you go. It's one-sided again. It should be written in Michif.
Yeah.
So you because the Métis is about two people, not just one. So that's what so that's that one-sidedness and whatever you're taught, and
yeah.
So I think that but that's all part of coming together in a circle and understanding where that person's at. In the book we have a part where I made a statement about, well, I can elaborate maybe a little more on from what the book said. I went to a hockey game in St. Paul, and there was natives and white St. Paul players and native players on the other side. And then there's a fellow from down the road, and a French settler, but he's married to a Métis girl. And he had a few drinks or something. He says, hey, Missal, you effing half-breed, why aren't you with the natives? And if that would have been back in my drinking days, I probably would have went and plowed him. And it was like the good Lord said. And so I made a joke out of it. I said, hey, I said, I got the best of two worlds. I said, if the natives are winning, I put my moccasin on and go and sit with them. I said, if the St. Paul's winning, I'll put my cowboy boot on. Well, these guys all started laughing. This guy didn't have an answer. So I mean, but I was blessed with coming out with a good answer instead of being but having the downside of that. 3 months later, I realized I still carried a resentment, because when I seen him at a car show, I was going to go up to him. I was going to say, you don't love your wife very much because she's Métis, and what does that make her if I'm an F and a half B? But then it was like, don't go there, because what I understood from that is you don't fight fire with fire. So I'm better off that made me understand what that guy was taught. He was taught to say stuff like that, and it came out when he drank. There was a lot of stuff that came out when I drank that was inside of me that wasn't nice. So that's what I have to do, come to an understanding that we're all together on a journey. Everybody's at a different place in their journey.
Yeah.
And if I can understand that and try to see the good part of the person, even if in my mind there's only 5% good, or 10% good in that person. Embrace that part. And the next time I see him, there might be 20% good. And that's what I got to look at. I got to look at the spark instead of try to look for the fire.
Yeah, that's good. I know it's shocking to me talking to elders like yourself who are always trying to teach folks like me who are not there. You have to find the good, you have to work on the good, and that's where you have to start from. And it's really hard. I get really angry when I heard how, a lot of like my elders literally in my mouth, like right here, right now, telling me how they've forgiven their abusers. And I just get so angry, so mad because the biggest thing I've been learning, obviously, is that anger shows that our boundaries have been, pole vaulted over. That we tried. I think Caleb really talked about it with the whole following, and then we become this angry Indian when we have the audacity to stand up for ourselves the way that any settler would. I was raised settler, so I have all the Karen energy in this little native body. So I have no problem standing up for myself.
Wow.
And it really bothers me because I see many of my friends, many of my sisters, even my elders who've been beaten down so much that they don't advocate for themselves, that they're past that point. They will never be there. And that bothers me. I never want to see that from the next generation, for sure. And I have so much tobacco and prayers that I put down so that, every single elder, every sister, every brother can find their voice and be who they are without being scared and intimidated by this white supremacist system. So, I appreciate your kindness and your love and your charity that you give to people who wrong you, because even for folks like me, I'm still trying to get there. I have no forgiveness for that right now. I feel like, you're educated, you have no reason to do this. And then you see their ugliness really come out. And I'm seeing it online. Online, they can hide behind profiles and be awful human beings. But, these are like, you feel what I felt in real life by people who I went to school with, by teachers, by, police today. I tried to do teachings for District 4, the Calgary Police, and there was this one very specific fellow, and he just clearly did not care. And then they shortly after that killed Robin Fiddler, and I just knew there was no place for me trying to teach these folks anything about Indigenous people. They just hate us. They want to kill us. They kill us, and they get away with it. And I see it. Kirsten, a young man's killer, just got away with it. And there's 2 Métis fellows up in your area that got killed for hunting for their families. And I'm not there. So when I hear you say these things, Roy, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you trying to teach me this, and teaching others are, it's not just me. There's many of us that are like done and tired of this mistreatment. And I hate that you get mistreated, and I hate that my daughter does, and I hate that my granny does, and my mom and everybody else. I just drives me crazy right now. So I got to learn how to let that go, because I'm on high blood pressure pills. So I appreciate you trying to teach this forgiveness, generosity,
Just
and
one little
kindness.
thing I want to say about
Sure.
Caleb, but we were talking about when COVID hit, we had this book club, and it made me feel like I got to get in and learn how to use a computer, and that I missed out on all that last winter. I could have been a part of that, but I'm old school, eh?
Yep.
I told him I when we started this book, I said I just got a cell phone. I just got rid of my smoke signal. So I'm kind of a little slow on everything. I better start catching up. I drive an Indian. There's a show, The World's Fastest Indian, but I might be fast on the motorbike, but not the computer world.
Oh my God. Yeah, you know what? So just to give you perspective, Roy, like, I'm of the generation that was supposed to be completely adaptable in computers. And this podcast did not have a video component until COVID. and I had to learn Zoom and I had to learn how to record. And then my husband, he said, no, it's easy for me to make this audio. So we continued the podcast, but I just started a YouTube, and my daughter, who's 14, is like, oh my God, my mom, she's so embarrassed, right? And understandably, when I was 14, I was embarrassed in my family too, but it's different because, to her, I should have done this YouTube stuff. Like that should have been the start of it, right? And so I'm not there yet with technology either. And even my husband, he has to teach me how to do editing so that I know how to do this a little more than being so dependent on him to do it. So,
like
don't feel alone.
It's like my mom said, my grandfather, he drove horse all his life and he got a Model T. And she said, all I remember him coming over the hill and he's pulling on the steering wheel and he's going, whoa, whoa. And like he's hitting every pedal and everything except because he rode horses all his life. And he says he's coming down that hill and he's pulling on the steering wheel trying to stop it. So I guess it's it's a transition with everything.
Yep.
But that's part of it. It's like, I don't need this. I don't need a computer. I don't need this. Well, the world's going ahead and I'm staying where I'm at. Well, it's either I change with the world or I get left behind. And I still think it's very important for people to get together one-on-one.
Yes.
But having said that, there's a lot of people in remote areas they can't, and that's where I think Zoom is good. But I think once COVID is over and people can start getting together, because I think as people we're made to have fellowship, direct fellowship with one another. Yes. And I think that's why, the native people, the teepee, the circle, it just, everything is, well, even the Métis, we have the infinity symbol. Yeah. So it's never ending. So I really think that's so important, and that's to me, that's a gift from the Creator. All that it means something. Mm-hmm. Maybe not to a lot of white settlers. Like I learned this in the treaties. They said where a lady explained that colonization is go straight ahead and knock everything down in front of you. It's kind of like flat, whereas the native way was about whatever you take, you replace. Mm. And that's called like keepers of the land, and to try to explain that to a settler, it's we need to produce. Well, does one farmer need to have 10,000 acres and the other guy next to him nothing? No, that's called greed and selfishness. Yeah, that's what I call it. But
I'm with you, my friend. I really appreciate you talking about this stuff. Something that I think that people may not understand that you do, because you have both the French and the English in St. Paul, is so a lot of the new generation, they're like, don't ever call me half-breed. That's the most offensive thing I've ever heard. And I tried to tell them, okay, but do you really understand why that term exists? And I think Maria Campbell explained it really well in her book, Half-Breed, where she talked about how every settlement of Canada had an English component and a French component, and the Indigenous that either got with the English or got with the French either were Métis or half-breeds. So that was actually an acceptable term to acknowledge whether you were French or English Indigenous. So what are your thoughts on that term? And I ask you that in the hopes that we can help our next generation understand it better.
Well, my term, half-breed, to me, I didn't really have a problem with it, other than the fact that I wasn't learned on it, like what it actually meant, but I realized now that half-breed meant if you were part Scotch or English or whatever, and you married into the native side, then you were considered a half-breed. I think Métis is a distinct, it just from the French. But the only part that I'm having a little bit of discontent with is I don't understand, like you're not allowed to have a Métis card if you're a half-breed. So I don't know where they fit in, like the half-breed itself, like where does he fit in as part of the whole picture?
Me too. Yeah, I'm trying to.
That's a part I'm very, I know the Métis, they've set their boundaries of who they are and what they are, but with history books, like the half-breed was all a part of this, all a part of the making of everything. So I think for myself that's going to cause a little controversy in upcoming stuff or whatever, but I don't know how it could be resolved. Like I just I don't really have too much to say on it. I just have a knowing that, an understanding that I'm of Métis descent, but that doesn't mean I don't have a concern of these other people that all played a part of history.
Yeah. I have a couple of thoughts about it.
Sure.
What comes to mind is Métis, French translated to English, means mixed.
Yeah.
Half-breed means mixed. If you look at, I'm struggling with the language, mestizo, or there's Spanish versions of the same thing, meaning mixed. And I'm sure if you look at every other mixed group in just about every language between colonizer and indigenous around the world, there'll be a word for it. That's really all I have to say about that. The piece I wanted to add was I've heard some discussion among more Métis academics or Métis sociologists, I guess, trying to push for a slight shift in the language away from Métis or half-breed to Michif. Just like you call someone Cree and they speak Cree, or Nehio and they speak Nehioewen, the Michif people speak Michif.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you, I mean, I wouldn't be doing justice to try to go in any more depth about that, but I'm sure you could find someone to have a very detailed and interesting conversation about that language piece. And if I'm remembering correctly, I might have gotten that piece of knowledge from the Métis podcast that's Canadian Geographic and Métis Nation of Saskatchewan collab called Pagwigwe. That's probably butchering the pronunciation, but I think that's where I got it from.
Sure.
And I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah. I think I've seen Christy Belcourt basically tweet that same kind of concept as well. And I think it's really important. And I don't, want to diminish anybody's rights by any stretch. The opposite. I think, so my lineage is way up north, and the way I see, the Inuit, the Dene, the Métis work together as if there's almost no difference, even though there is, like, obviously the Inuit and the Métis, they have their own distinct languages, which of course then means they have their own distinct culture. But there is so much coming together of the three. So when I hate pan-indigenizing people, I do. I just wish that we understood that we all have inherent rights. And I just felt like up north, they understand that better. But, there is so much whitewashing up there too. And, I come from a very, very proud Catholic family, because that's what they were told at Fort Providence Sacred Heart. You better be Catholic. So, but I obviously, I'm trying to reconnect who I am. And that doesn't include the church, actually the opposite. So I have a lot of respect for folks like yourself trying to work with the churches. And that was really clear within the book that you were, trying to work with everyone. And as much as I try, I'm beyond having patience for white fragility. 100% actually. And I've had people try to literally get me fired from volunteering a book club because I've called them out on their white fragility. So, it's such a shame, because it's, it's work they have to do on that. Us talking about our truths shouldn't be something that we get attacked for, but it happens all the time. But Roy and Caleb, I can't thank you enough for coming on my show, sharing your perspectives. And Roy, Caleb, both of you, I'd love to have you back anytime, especially on some of the work you're doing with reconciliation, because, I think if we're going to be honest about what reconciliation is, we do need to have these talking circles across the country. I have noticed some of the churches have become, a subcommittee of reconciliation, having that conversation. And it's the people who really care about it that seem to be all on these circles. And I think we all have to come together, one, to, you know, give each other strength. But that bigger picture is that I think we're all coming across the same thing of settler fragility, white fragility, and we need to, you know, get past that threshold. And hopefully we can collectively figure out how to do that together. And as we move forward, you know, I want to share your wins. And I think this book is a ridiculous win. And it's so inspiring to me to, I hope that more folks all across the country make a book very similar to this. And I'll obviously share the link, but is there a link that is the preferred link so that you guys can maybe get at least some of the costs back and preferably donations going to your reconciliation club?
Well, we don't take donations, and if you're buying the book print copy, it's being sold at cost because it was paid for by Alberta tax dollars from a grant, and so yeah, it's being published through Amazon, and the print copy is sold at cost, and you can also get the Kindle copy for 99 cents. So that's the best way to get it, is through Amazon. If for some reason somebody doesn't want to pay for the book, they can message us on Facebook or email us reconstpaul@gmail.com, and I'll send you a free PDF. Getting the story out there is more important than the money. I think we have to break our relationship with money and understand that economy is bigger than capitalism. Sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent. That's all I wanted to say. So
I welcome. Yeah.
I'd like to say for all the elders out there, just think about, instead of bingo this winter.
Say that again.
Instead of going to bingo this winter, one night maybe sit down and start reading a good book called Restoring St. Paul to Bingo.
You know what?
Just
Roy,
a suggestion.
You know what? I tell everyone my Bible is the GRC, so I feel you on this.
And whoever wants to sit down and read the book, they can phone me, and I'll maybe even throw in the bucket of KFC.
Hey, I want that. It's been my pleasure, and I can't wait to have you guys come back at any time to talk about some of your wins or lows. I'd love to hear it. And we have our book club coming up on Monday through the public library, and some of you are going to come join us. And again, this is an Indigenous-centered conversation. I'll record that, throw it up on my YouTube as well. So I really hope, that a lot of people have a lot of, good questions to ask you, and that, you feel comfortable on not just my podcast, but our book club as well, because this is how the work is going to get done if we're honest about reconciliation and healing intergenerational trauma. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so I have a ridiculous long exit, and the reason why I repeat it every single episode is because folks in St. Paul, this might be the one and only Native Calgarian they listen to, so these resources might be new to them, and if they're not, that's even better, because that means that they already know that all these resources exist. So and feel free, both of you, to pop in if I say something that you'd like to add to. I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions and included cultural safety training or cultural first aid, and almost all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous, people of color, those with disabilities, and LGBTQ2+ to speak. I want to say thank you to Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca. They have a section on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. And I've said it over 100 times in my podcast, so please support Indigenous work as part of your reconciliation work and settler understanding. I'm just lucky enough to repeat it and highlight it here. Internalized racism or lateral violence is another form of violence Indigenous and marginalized folks experience by the structure of supremacy imposed on these lands. RacialEquityTools.org has a good piece about internalized racism by Donna Bevins. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. They have a whole piece. If you see or experience racism, you can report it at acttoendracism.ca or text at 587-507-3838 here in Alberta. And those are actually our Asian friends that have put that together. Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded, no more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize the marginalized in their budgets with Gender Equity Plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs and services, if they're cutting Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, if they just have a lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, know that your vote to those parties are directly negatively impacting marginalized people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing racism in the educational, justice, and health institutions, with multiple reports that say the same things. Demand changes from election platforms and politicians. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, and sexism, they literally have zero business running. This should be understood by all parties, local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, etc. A great article I read out loud is episode 62 is Truth Before Truth, How Non-Indigenous Canadians Become Allies. Actually, as of today, there's tons of different, how to be an ally to Indigenous people if you were to Google it. So I really encourage that. If you're experiencing emotional distress after hearing anything we talked about today and want to talk, you can call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 855-242-3310. It is toll free, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also text at their website at hopeforwellness.ca. If you more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. It is 24/7 crisis line as well. If you're non-Indigenous, there are distress center lines in your area, usually a functioning 211, or you can call 833-456-4566. And there's also a 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta, hashtag survivor driven, if that's an issue as well. The Trevor Project has wonderful resources for LGBTQ2+, especially youth. And you can even text at 647-694-4275. And the Kibbs help phone, of course, 1-800-668-6868. And lifevoice.ca has tons of crisis support lines for peer, whichever you're looking for. Violence is an everyday reality for me. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. That's why I started the podcast, to speak freely without interruption, without tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions, because many people don't want to hear Indigenous opinions, but sure want to tell theirs. There's not an understanding of colonialism, the constant surveillance of Indigenous people, our protests, our vigil, and our rights. There are microaggressions, and then people dealing with internalized racism and become real gatekeepers. Internal, external racism is an everyday reality for Indigenous people. I want to say thank you to my ancestors, my granny, my mom, and what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for teaching me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I am a second generation proud Calgarian. Thank you to my husband, Darcy, for producing and editing this show. On top of being my husband, my childhood friend, the father of our child, he has supported me in my journey of the Red Road for decades, witnessing racism and sexism. And to our child, who we are blessed to learn from daily, we are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. And I hope one day that my family will be proud of us trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they can understand. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to the previous donors for showing your support. If you value listening, watching, and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And I did say I came from the land of the hair people. So I want to say I give side eye to all these Calgary and Treaty 7 rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin responded, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you for listening.